Welcome to the monthly webinar series organized by Sri Lanka Evaluation Association called SLEvA. So today we have very interesting topic that is highly need and the need of the hour of in the evaluation field. So we welcome all the participants joining from throughout the world who are engaged in the field of evaluations. So as you may have known that in order to make the evaluation needs well monitored, well evaluated, the importance of data is very vital. Without meaningful data, we will not be able to have meaningful output or outcomes or interpretive impact for our evaluation projects. So when it comes to this data, we mainly be focusing on the method of where we can collect data. Data will be all around, but we have to find a good way of collecting data. In addition, the very challenging point in this data collections for evaluation need is how we can ensure the ethics in the data collections. So these are the 2 points that we will be discussing today, that is on data collections and ethics in data collections. So in order to make the opening remarks for today's webinar series, I would like to invite Ms.Sandamali Ariyarathna, who is the Executive Council member and editor, and also the member of the Academic Committee of Sri Lanka Evaluation Association. In addition, she is professionally a monitoring, evaluation and learning specialist. So over to you, Ms. Sandamali Ariyarathna.
Thank you, Dr. Sabeen. It's my pleasure to deliver opening remarks for today's webinar. As all of you know, this is the second webinar for 2025, year 2025, starting with January. So today's I welcome all of the participants for today's webinar, which will be delivered by one of my good friend and a former colleague, and a professional in evaluation and monitoring and evaluation sector in the development field. So Dr. Sabeen will introduce our speaker next. So I will let him to do that. But I would like to again welcome all of you and tell you that next hour would be very fruitful hour for all of you, for your knowledge, for your experience. Some may learn things new and some may unlearn things and learn again. As well as some may refresh your knowledge that you had throughout in your career or in your academic life. So wishing you for a knowledgeable hour. Stay with us for entire hour and even for next webinars. Over to you, Dr. Sabeen, to take over the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Sandamali. So having heard from Ms. Sandamali, so we'll be waiting for to get to know who is going to be the resource person for today. It is none other than Mr. Indika Sovis. So Indika Sovis is a highly experienced professional in the development sector with over 15 years of expertise in monitoring, evaluation, and learning, MEL. He has led comprehensive evaluations across diverse sectors, leveraging a strong command of mixed method research approaches that integrate both quantitative as well as qualitative methodologies to generate actionable insights. Throughout his career, Mr. Sovis has held key positions in prominent international non-governmental organizations, including World Vision Lanka, Save the Children International, where he played a pivotal role in project management and MEL. He also served as senior manager MEL for the USAID Climate Adaptation Project, leading critical learning and evaluation initiatives. In addition, his expertise in capacity building was instrumental in developing and implementing MEL capacity strengthening strategy for USAID model activity. Beyond his organization's role, Mr. Sovis has extensive experience managing MEL consultancies for various development organizations in Sri Lanka. His proficiency is particularly evident in large-scale surveys and data collection efforts, notably with World Food Programme, where he successfully oversaw projects employing more than 100 enumerators and facilitated the completions of 15,000 household surveys in a single iteration. Currently, Mr. Sovis operates as an independent evaluation consultant, continuing to provide strategic insight and evidence-based recommendations to enhance development effectiveness. So having said that, so we would like to welcome today's resource person, very useful and a very competent resource person to talk on these data collections and ethics in data collections. Mr. Indika Sovis, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Sabeen, and for that nice welcoming note. And thank you for SLEvA for having me. And it's a really pleasure and honor for me to have this session. So let's dive into the details. So today's topic, as mentioned, introduced by Dr. Sabeen, we are going to talk about data quality, data collection methods, and ethics in data collection. So for today's session, we are basically talking about three elements, that is introducing to the different types of data and how we ensure quality of data during our data collection processes, and how we ensure ethics in data collection, perhaps one of the important element that is with increasing importance in this increasing a complex world where we need to create this privacy and respect for persons in collecting data and utilizing data in our research work. So for next step, then first, so let's get to know type of data. So there are, as you can understand, there may be different classification of data and how, based on the source, based on the nature of data, based on the other elements, and how many data, how data generated and utilized in different research purposes. So basically, I'm going to talk about two main classifications. There can be many other classifications. So first of all, I would like to draw your attention onto the data source. Based on the data source, we basically categorize data as primary and secondary. Primary data basically are the ones that you collect for the originally collect for the your research purpose or the evaluation or any other research activity that you are going to conduct. So it's like a once you define your research objectives, if you are collecting, not relying on the other available data, so if you are making original effort to collect data, that data is primary for you. So that is primary data. So what are secondary data? Secondary data is the original, already available data collected by someone else for a different purpose. So it is available through published reports, maybe some inside different organizations, and internal data, published data. So it is not really collected by you, but collected by someone else for a different purpose. That data also carrying real importance because as you can I will explain in a bit because sometimes that it is really useful to rely on secondary data because its primary data is going to take more effort and timely, and based on the accuracy level we need, we can always rely on secondary data as well. Then the next classification that we can look upon is the nature of data. So based on the nature of data, we can classify mainly as quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative data are data like numerical data, numeric value, where you can actually conduct thorough analysis based on statistical software, statistics, and they can use different percentages and they can get different regression analysis. So quantitative data really important part, providing insights over how the trends has been, how it the using numerics. So qualitative data, what is qualitative? Qualitative data is about more nuance, more in-depth information that we can explore in a further deep down on a particular scenario. For an example, quantitative data will provide us the numbers, right? Okay, how has been the school attendance over the years, the trend, earlier enrollment rates. But qualitative data provide what are the reasons behind those trends. Then why it happening? Why it is important? What caused the changes? Everything like that. So you may wonder that what is more prominent, what is more important, that quantitative versus qualitative. So most people, in most of our development research, it is usually considered that quantitative is more superior to qualitative. Maybe qualitative is fairly less utilized in certain areas, but qualitative data also really powerful. There is no differentiation as when it comes to the importance of it, because those both kind of data will provide different aspects, because it's you need to complement quantitative information with qualitative information if you want to have a big picture. So when a research combines the utilization of quantitative and qualitative methods, it's called mixed method. So it's like not for depending on the research objectives. Some researchers may be purely based on quantitative, if you need to descriptives and just trend analysis, and we are not careless about the reasons behind it. Just you want just numbers, then it's okay. You have to rely on quantitative information. So there may be some other researchers that quantitative information doesn't really matter too much. You have to see the reasons behind it, whether it is not the significant level that you are really care about, what are the real deep down reasons. So then qualitative would be the best. But if you are looking for the overall picture, then the mixed method approach would be the best way to define a real situation, because you are complementing with the numbers with the reasons behind it. Right, okay. So then let's think about the data collection method. So things to consider between the primary and depending on the source, I'm just prepared this slide, depending on the source, whether you go into primary or secondary. So then as you would understand that secondary information either can be qualitative and quantitative. Primary information also either can be quantitative or qualitative, right? So then, so first, when you're planning for a research, so what do you need to consider first? Right? So then, first you have to see, I would say that whether secondary data is available to suit your requirement. Because if secondary data is available, you don't want to bother about going to extensive primary data collection. You can reduce the burden of data collection if the secondary data is available. For an example, I was engaged in certain other development projects. We needed certain information about the nutritional status of children. So to measure the malnutrition levels of children, if you're going to measure that, that would be really burden, because it's like, okay, you have to take the weight and height measurements, and then you have to take this proper calculation methods. But it's also felt unnecessary because government through MOH, they collect those routine data is available monthly or quarterly basis. So then what we can do is to get that information and get to an agreement with them. So have show the mutual beneficial level that so then you can come into a data sharing agreement. So in that way, so you can decide whether that secondary information is reliable enough or accurate enough, or whether it's falling within your research objectives. So then you can go for secondary information. If your research objectives are there are no matching information available that you after you see because it's like timeliness also matters. So then you might have to go to a certain extent primary data collection as well. And then certain we'll talk about data collection methods. So these are mostly these data collection methods I classified based on the nature of the data, that is quantitative and qualitative. So if you go into quantitative data that you can use paper-based data collection, actually we use that for a certain time period, but with the introduction of technology, now we are more into using computer-assisted personal interviews, that is called CAPI or paper-based. The advantage of using CAPI, the computer-assisted personal interview, means, okay, you go into door-to-door survey, but you are using a handheld device to enter data. You ask the questions, but you enter data real time. So that the advantage of doing that is like real time. You don't need to incur additional time for data collection. So there are different tools that you can use. I will explain that in a moment. So other paper-based is like, okay, you have to have certain time after the data collection. There are certain other risks and costs associated with the paper-based in comparison to mobile data collection as well. So there's another highly popularizing data collection methods called CATI, computer-assisted telephone interviews. So same way, you can do the enumerator, can telephone over the telephone call. You can conduct interviews. It is faster than having personal interviews, doing physical door-to-door interviews, because if you need more frequent and more cost-effective way, and without compromising the quality, you can opt to telephone interviews. Telephone interviews maybe duration might be shorter than the door-to-door personal interviews, because people won't be available to hang into the online for a longer time. So that is another one of the limitation of the telephone interviews. And another thing is self-administered questionnaires. Self-administered questionnaires are like forms, like, okay, you provide a link through Google Form for a simple questionnaire, and it should be not complex like telephone interviews and personal interviews. Okay, you can ask because there's an enumerator, you can explain the question. But the self-administered questionnaire, you expect that the recipient of that questionnaire will have certain level of understanding of the question, and you make it more simpler and do simple data collections. So you can use different tools for that as well. So other than that, you can use observations to gather quantitative data as well. So document reviews, you can gather quantitative data through document review as well. So there is secondary data. For an example, if a central bank report is a census report, so whatever you are getting that quantitative information is from a secondary source. So then that can be counted as a quantitative from a secondary source. So qualitative data, when you come to qualitative data, two main things, most prominent things are group discussion, focus group discussions, and key informant interviews is one single person where you consider as an important provider of information. So key difference is focus group discussion. You have a different like-minded set of people in a one setting. Like-minded means who are sharing same characteristics. For an example, in a village setting, have a discussion with community leaders. Have a discussion with maybe group of Gramidari officers. So or women entrepreneurs. So it also that classification of the program for the focus group discussion also depending on your research objective. So if you are actually considering how men and women are different in decision making in the village setting, so how women are empowered to do that, you might want to have a separate male and female discussions. But if you're considering it's like not a gender biased thematic area for a commonly held something community knowledge, so you can consider having a mixed group. It doesn't affect the uh, real outcome of the result, but it also depend based on your research objective. Key informant interview is that you identify key information providers for your research, then you have personally interviewing them based on a semi-structured question. In-depth interview is a kind of an interview that you go to a particular, like a case study. In a particular setting, you interview a person, like going to that is also based on the need, because I remember that we had to do certain kind of in-depth interviews to understand the life of malnourished child. So how the household decisions were made, because we are interviewing not just 1 hour or two, but it's like we are looking into many aspects of their lives and what made their decisions and like that. So it's like selecting a 1 or 2 persons for the case studies. So then go in deep down. It's not like a surface level interview, but we'll do more additional information. Observations also, you can, through observation also, you can collect qualitative data as well. So document reviews as well. So you can see that observations and document reviews comes in both quantitative and qualitative places, because that they can serve the generate both kind of quantitative and qualitative data as well. Okay. So then this is I explained earlier that when you collect data, that there are some digital tools available nowadays for you to collect information on through surveys. So Open Data Kit is a mobile tool that you can use it, and Kobo Toolbox also similarly, both similar. ODK and Kobo Toolbox, mostly both these two options are really good options for a complex data collections, because having multiple level of different questions, and if you need to have some kind of skips means like okay, there are certain questions that is not relevant to certain groups, certain beneficiaries, so then you can have advanced kind of data formats using this ODK and Kobo Toolbox. So this is good for a enumerator-led data collection in that set for surveys and your detailed data collections. Google Forms, Microsoft Forms, and other forms actually good for self-administered questionnaires, because you share a link, then they can actually respond with simple questions. For self-administered questionnaires, it's like it should not take very lengthy questions, and it should not take more than 5 to 10 minutes to complete one form. But ODK and Kobo Toolbox, depending on that, maybe you can have that discussion and the interview for more than even half an hour or 45 minutes interviews you can conduct, because you are conducting using enumerators. The basic things in this digital data collection tools actually more appropriate for quantitative data collection because it's mostly open-ended questions. Because if you incur like more of a close-ended questions there, close-ended question. Am I audible still, Dr. Sabeen?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
Cindy.
You're audible.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Proceed.
If you incur close-ended questions, it is that digital data collection is complicated because that the enumerator might take a lot of time to input the data, and it might not provide accurate information. So it's like if you can pre-code the responses, and if you can have the categorized responses, actually these two are good. Uh, uh, Even for qualitative data, if you can pre-code and categorize that, you can do that. But if you are going into more exploratory, if you are relying on more community perceptions, then if you cannot predict in advance what to expect, so then you better go for focus group discussions or qualitative data collection methods rather than relying on digital data collection tools. Okay, so that completes our first segment. You can actually keep your Q&As, and then we have a separate Q&A session as well. So let's move into quality assurance part now. So different classifications as well in the based on our data source and data type. Okay, so then first the definition of quality assurance in data collection is to it refers to the process and measures to because data we expect that to serve because we do surveys for our evaluation to generalize our findings to a certain extent. So there are certain measures in statistically as well as when you are providing that information, there should be a certain level of accuracy, reliability, and consistency in your presentation. Otherwise, if someone relies on your information, that the decision making won't be accurate as you would expect. So then, for that purpose, we need to what we can do to ensure quality of our data collection. Okay. So in secondary information, because we first go for secondary information, because even though primary considered if you are taking effort, but the recommend rule of thumb is to see the availability of secondary data, because data collection for research need to be cost effective and it should serve the purpose. If you can manage with available secondary information without incurring additional cost, it is highly recommended for you to go for that. So, but choosing secondary data needs certain criteria, because you have to ensure that your research objectives are not compromised because they're relying on just a secondary data. Because if you have to see the credibility of the source, then accuracy and the reliability and the whether it is relevant, because that okay, there are some research studies done earlier, but your research objectives and your research questions are a little bit different. But there might be overlapping areas that you can extract certain information from that. So then you can see which information you can get and what are the information that you cannot cover from that. And then you have to see whether that data is really still valid. For an example, if the latest census that we are going to take around 20 years ago, so then it might not be valid for the demographic features to predict today's features, right? So then you have to see what is the most acceptable data period of time depending on your research. But there is no specific, okay, whether it is 10 or 20 years, but it really depends on your sensitivity of to your research objective. So data completeness and consistency also have to look into it, and whether we can get all the information from that sources. So are there any underlying biases, and what are the secondary information also you have, there should be you should be able to see whether that the data collection has followed a proper acceptable data collection methods in their research. So then based on that, you can decide uh, whether you can utilize that secondary information or you have to plan for your own primary data collection. Okay, so then where you can get secondary data. So this is not an exhaustive list, but some sort of examples from government sources, censuses, from public services of the departments, and central bank in case of Sri Lanka, and other departments. So maybe because that different institutions, government institutions, they have uh, different level of information. Prime example, meteorological department, they have information, maybe forest department regarding the forest cover, and there are almost every government institutions have their own data sets for their purposes. And then private sector data. So business analytics, and if you are doing a market research or you want to see how the consumer behavior, consumer patterns, a lot of private sector also might have a lot of data with them. So so you have to see whether the possibility of getting from their data sources for your relevant research. And then academic and other research data published using universities and think tanks and other scientific studies. You can still get good uh, good sources from there. So whether you have to just make the judgment whether your research objectives are falling with those researchers. And then if you want to do the spatial satellite, you can use this satellite imagery. And social media analytics also now becoming more popular for certain things. For an example, that there are growing concerns like, okay, hate speech and extreme use of violence using social media. So then social media monitoring is also becoming increasingly important data source for those kind of research. So those are sources of secondary information, right? So when it comes to primary information, that I divided this into two areas: primary quantitative and primary secondary. So when you're planning for have a quantitative data collection by your own, that is primary. So then first it's important to have the sampling frame for the study. So having a sampling frame and your study scope, that is another big area that you need to consider. Need a lot of technical inputs. So that is I'm not going to cover that within this particular webinar. So we need to understand what is the sampling frame, what is the accuracy level that you are expecting, whether you are going to do hypothesis testing, and whether you are just relying on descriptives or whether you're going for experiential statistics. So your sampling frame really depend on those determinants. So then ensuring high quality questionnaire design. So questionnaire design also another aspect that we are not going to cover entirely through this webinar. But as you would say that because your research questions, you need to be translated properly to the audience or your target group. So having a good quality questionnaire and ensuring that every aspect of your questions are answered, you need to have a good, clear questionnaires in good, clear language, and make sure that your enumerators also get familiar with that. So it's need to be very unbiased, and very questions need to be framed in that way. So then that is also an important part. These are two big components in the data collection process. So then another important aspect is if you are using enumerators, provide a comprehensive enumerator training. And you have to use procedures or the enumerators because that they are, you need to ensure that the enumerators don't that your inputs are not depending on the enumerator bias, because there's an enumerator bias uh, can be because humans are prone to make mistakes. So, but you have to minimize it. So that to minimize it, one way of ensuring is to provide a comprehensive enumerator training and provide specific guidelines, and the even in the field when it because you are making the sample frame at your uh, conceptual level, but when actually going into the field, if you don't have a properly, if you don't, there are, when it comes to data collection, you might get the list first because if if you are going to sample different from a granular division level, there may be other classifications to get the detail, but giving an example. So let's say if you are going to survey a selected community members from a particular GN divisions. So you made a contact with the Gamantari division GN officer, and then you can get a list of, let's say, like you are in a particular GN division, there are 300 households. So you are selecting 100 households, but you are rightly picking households by that you are selecting and giving the enumerator that this is the household that you need to visit. In that case, you need to ensure that enumerator goes and find that household. That also need to uh, ensure that if the uh, particular household head or someone was not at the home at that moment, so what are the alternatives that you can take? Whether you can replace it with another randomly selected household from that village. There may be some instances actually you don't get to have that list upfront. Then in that case, that enumerator need to make the call at the field which households to visit during a data collection. So for that, you have to be extra careful providing enumerators how to pick households, whether you're going to systematically, okay, 1 in 5 houses, because it really, the important thing is whatever you select the method, it is consistently applied by everyone in the group. So then it won't create any biasness. So this sometimes it's like depending on the questionnaire that you consider using male or female respondents as well. So if you are sensitive to the gender perspectives, if you are thinking of women might be more feel marginalized in certain areas. Okay, for an example, let's say that you are serving certain things on the domestic violence incidents. So the women respondent might behave or respond differently if that question is asked by a male enumerator versus female enumerator. So then in that, depending on the sensitivity of the questions that you are asking or the target audience that you're asking, you have to consider what is the most appropriate. So if you are, otherwise your data collection would lead into bias and missing information and missing key areas. And also that after you ensuring this comprehensive enumerator training, it is important that you do a pilot test. Pilot test is like a small scale data collection effort without fully deploying the full data collection. So why this pilot test is important? Because pilot study actually provide whether there are any issues and how they behave. Even though we conceptual level, we develop questions, it is also like a litmus test when it goes to field. The people maybe respond differently. They might not understand the question, or they might provide different answers, or there would be some different views coming from the enumerators themselves. So it would be a good practice to have a pilot study. Then after the pilot study, get together with all the feedback and responses from all the group of enumerators, and then make the adjustments to your original questionnaire. So it will test the survey instrument and provide any tweaks, and it will provide more accurate representation of the translations, and then you can expect more high quality inputs from respondents as well. Okay. So that is about that we talked about how to do the quantitative surveys. So what about qualitative? Qualitative data collections, actually two main areas that we discussed as earlier: focus group discussions and key informant interviews. In either case that you are interviewing a person or a group of persons, and then you are keeping the questionnaire very open. So beforehand, it is important that you develop semi-structured questionnaire guides, ensuring the coverage of research objectives. Because in your qualitative data collection design, you might have different type of learning questions, different questions that you want answers. But learning questions, you cannot ask straightforwardly. You have to ask in a different way. How do you break down that questions? Okay, if you ask questions, because there would be certain questions, there would be some social desirability biasness, right? Okay, for an example, maybe if you give the choice for people to answer whether, for an example, domestic violence case, let's take. No, do you think that anyone would accept that there would be domestic violence by a male partner? If you are asked from the male partner, he might not actually answer that. He might give a different answer. So then how do you get that information? So that then it depends on the how you are designing that research question. You have to keep it very open, and then there should be a breakdown of questions, and maybe you have to use some proxy questions as well. What is meant by proxy? Proxy is a type of question that you are not asking a direct question, but you consider some other indirect measures highly relevant to the direct that answer that we are going to expect. For an example, it is a well-known fact that people, most of the households, they don't really give an accurate picture of their household income. Sometimes it is difficult to provide them for an household income, because for some families, their income might not be regular. They might get seasonal income or occasional income. So when you ask from the monthly income, so they cannot really break it down or accumulate, sum it up or break it down for a monthly average. So that in that case, they might wonder, and whatever the response you might get is won't show the accurate picture. I think it's with a lot of farming communities, we have that problem, because their income is not regular. You know that there are two main seasons for paddy cultivations in Sri Lankan context. So they have this kind of seasonality. But seasonality also, they do not recall that because they don't calculate the cost of inputs that they actually incurred, and the inputs they provide is not really represent the real picture. So in that case, a proxy indicator would be assets. What are the household assets they have? So there is a very common proxy that you are going to take for a livelihood or wealth of households. So in that manner, so you can consider, if you are expecting that for certain questions, that if the accurate responses would not forthcoming, so you can consider other ways of getting that information. And in that way, you can develop your semi-structured questionnaire guides. And if you are using other than yourself, there is other moderators or facilitators. So you need to provide the uniformity and consistency across everyone to minimize any biasness. So then you will get the data in a consistent manner. And other thing is like when you come to analyzing. So you always get to analyze the transcription. Transcription means after after the qualitative interview, you take out the conversation either by note takers, so using voice recording, and then you identify the certain text pattern, and then you code it, and then come into conclusions. What is the most prominent feature that we can observe in that setting? So we need to ensure that every minor detail is considered into transcription. But more often than not, that one of the limitations in inherent limitation maybe in this data collection, qualitative information, certain level of information is going to miss, because people that verbatim, the way they express, the body language, the real tone variations. So simple, when you ask questions about the simple yes, simple okay, is really different from a very confident yes. So then if I'm not going to take that into consideration, so that the level of community engagement or the research questions might get little bit distorted in the way. So that so that is an important area, maybe overlooked by most of the researchers because of the complexity, but it is also important if you're making really sensitive for this level of their information or the level of their engagement that we are going to look in. So the emotions, that the tone variation and interaction, so those are important factors in during these discussions. So other key important that similar to the sample size, because in the quantitative study we determine sample size to have this statistical accuracy. But in the qualitative data collection, what is the sample size? That is often a question. But in here, what we expect in the practice in qualitative data collection, we consider the saturation point. Because saturation means like, okay, that you explore certain things, but the more and more interviews or more and more data collection that you are going to, when you are conducting, you observe that the level of new information forthcoming from new interviews become increasingly less and less. Okay, for an example, let's say that you are doing all the qualitative information for data collection by yourself. So then you go for the first interview. Then you get certain level of information. Everything is new because it's the first one. So the second interview that you hear the same thing that the previous respondent has said by the second one and some additional information, right? The second one may not say some information that the first one had said, but in addition to the first one, the second one may have said some new information. So that is new information. So if you go for the third one, he or she might provide some unique information where first and second one has not provided. So in that manner, when you increase more and more, you will notice that it is coming to a very declining trend because you are not hearing new information. So that is where the point where that you can satisfy that you have gathered all the relevant available information in this your research area. So that is, you make a decision to stop your data collection. So that is known as reaching the saturation point. Okay. So it is also important, similar to the sample size in the quantitative research. Okay. So those are the key things. So this the graphical demonstration of it. Okay, if you just show that first few interviews, okay, you will get the this level, and then it will gradually decrease. Okay, those are the key aspects I wanted to cover in the data collection and quality assurance part. So let's go into ethics in data collection. So ethics in data collection is an important and increasingly applied and increasingly discussed in the social research, where it first emerged in the medical research. So what is the specific importance of this ethics? Because it's like in uh, in today's context, we are dealing with a lot of information and because our data is consistently collected by uh, different sources. Maybe, for an example, unknowingly that our information, because if you are using now this Google and other tools, because our privacy and every information is stored there. So they have a kind of also, for an example, even credit cards, because it's stored information about the buyer behavior. So those information actually having a large databases, those are big data analytics, and there are ongoing debates whether these companies can ethically use this information and for which purposes. And you might also wonder that how if I search for the one thing in a uh, something in a uh, website for online site, online retail store, you will consistently get notifications, maybe emails, some other notifications on the same matter. So that is how the data, these algorithms, and these are collected in this digital space. But how it's relevant to this to our data collection? So that's clinical trials. One of the prominent case studies is emerged in the is called Tuskegee syphilis trial. This is a case of unethical experiment, medical experiment done by the United States American Medical Research Project, US Public Health Services, that went on to 40 years, starting from 1932 to 1972, that they wanted to examine the nature of the syphilis, which is a sexually transmitted disease. If untreated, what would happen if untreated? So then it involves in a very marginalized group of sharecroppers, they say, like from Macon country in Alabama county, in Alabama, one of the state, which is considered one of the poorest in the United States. So this impoverished, actually, they did this with black men and the participants, and they had syphilis, and but the medical health service, they lured into this research study, providing them certain incentives, and actually who were participants were thinking that actually we are getting treated, but they were not treated. But at the end of the experiment, 28 of the men died directly of the syphilis, and more than 100 were dead related to complication. And more than their infection has gone into their wives and other family members and children as well. So the unethical of this research the whistle was blown in 1972 by a journalist. So then there was a hugely controversial, it became a surface. It's really defamation for the US public service as well. And so that emerged the discussion of the ethical background of these research studies. So I think we are actually running out of time. I'm just rushing with this one. So respect for persons. So then three elements, right? Okay, like beneficence, justice, and respect for persons are the key elements. And these are the informed consent. And when it comes to respect and privacy and confidentiality, and when you want to do this ethics, that it is important that you get the consent and you are not ensuring the confidentiality and do no harm and use the language that is appropriate for data collections. And beneficence is like you need to ensure that that research objectives will not harm. And by participating this research, you will have the danger risk object minimized, and any potential risks actually will be compensated more than the benefits of this research. So justice is the ensure the selection of the subjects is equitable. In addition to that, I want to highlight one of the thing is like if you wanted to do a research and published, there is institutional review board, and you might be data collection tool and other things need to be approved by the uh, data institutional review boards, commonly also the ethics review committee. There will otherwise if the ethics review is not that clearance is not taken, that your research might not get published in certain journals, because it is important element in the data collection and the research process. So that is the core thematic areas that I wanted to cover for that or through this discussion. So Dr. Sabeen.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for your very comprehensive presentations on this data collections as well as the data collection ethics. So now time for the Q&A sessions. So the audience, if you have any questions, you can put it into the chat box. So we are here to accommodate your questions. Meanwhile, we have a questions. The question is, what is the data safety and data security in Google Forms?
So Google Forms, it's like it's pretty. Google has given its terms and terms of reference. Normally, it's similar to what you are going to choose it in your email, Gmail, and Google. But it's a debatable topic. But it's like always advisable not to use publicly available free sources for very sensitive data collection. But it is if it's something not very sensitive and confidential information, you can use Google Forms, but for not for very personal level information through Google Form, because we cannot rely on the data breaches. But if you're having a private contractor having your data hosting in your in a contractual obligation with someone contractor, that is more safer. So then, but it's like your day-to-day some will not very confidential matters. Google Forms is a fairly useful source.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So Ranjit Tabru, I think you have questions. If you like, you can ask your questions. Ranjit Tabru, you have a question? Okay, right. So I have a small question that now we know that in ethics, we need to collect this consent from the informant, and informed consent has to be received. What are the challenges that you have observed? Practical challenges. Can you briefly explain, very roughly, very briefly?
Yeah, sometimes that challenge would be certain respondents might still not trusting you, because it's like they might say like, okay, they want more information. Then most suitable way you provide the clearance and what is how you are going to use that information, what is the purpose of your research, then make them understand why they are important inputs are matters for their research. But still, if they are insisting on not providing any information, but you have to, that is the most ethical thing to just let them respect their decision not to participate. But in most of the cases, we didn't experience in that much. once we explain that in a proper way, that most of the people will understand. But the important thing is that you explain in a very simple language for them to understand. So then most probably they will understand, but yet you have to respect their decision.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr.
Yeah,
Sharic, my audio has been open, so I can ask the question. May I?
Yeah, proceed.
Mr. Sovis, I must congratulate for a very clear and a concise presentation on a difficult topic. But I have a couple of questions. One is, you talk about the interviews being individual or group. Well, what is your recommendation? Do you normally do the interviews with the individuals first and find out the background? Because very often the individuals are not prepared to divulge their own feelings in a group. So is that a better way of doing that? And my second question is regarding the ethics. Now, usually the evaluators prepare the questions to please the client and the sponsors, the people who provide the money, but completely ignore the end users. I think that has a bigger ethic issue than the other one, actually, because if you take an example like during the tsunami, there was some of the fishermen were all driven away from the sea. And there was one area that fishermen were taken 2 kilometers away from the. Every day they had to carry their nets and then the boats and everything and come. So that sort of, you need to ask the fishermen, what do they want? How do they want things done? That never happens. Your views on this, please.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ranjit, for that very insightful question. Let me go first for the first question. And first one, actually, there is no order in which that you want to approach the first which key informant or focus group discussion. Key informants, actually, you will interview one of a kind people. For an example, if you are going to discuss in, it's like a duty bearers, official duty bearers, and some respondents in that category. For an example, you have a key informant interview with the divisional secretariat of a particular division, or maybe you have a high-ranking government official, and maybe one of the Brahmagari is from your target area. So that represent that those are not many, but you select one from that categorical target group. Focus group discussions we normally go because if there are a lot of people representing the same characteristics, for example, community members, you don't normally pick one or two people, have to engage in individual to get that qualitative information, I would say. So you go for a group setting. Group setting, actually, that is why we need to provide some training for group, how not to dominate, how to manage the dynamics in the group settings as well in important part. So then you can get more diverse opinions in the one setting in a to a group discussion. For the second question you asked, that is actually that I think ethical, that one, beneficence. Beneficence is like, okay, you need to ensure that people are not harmed, and the justice as well, because it's like that should be, I think, very basic principle. More from them we see that it is violated. It's not just the a gap in the existing requirements, is the gap between the practice. So that need to be addressed with the increased knowledge and the professionalism of the evaluators as well. They need to make deliberate steps to do that, no matter who fund the research study. They need to convince them of this requirement and uphold that professionalism in their data collection. So that's my recommendation.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, sir. We'll take, since we are running out of time, we'll take the last two questions. The one question is, at what percentage of minimum questions to be answered by the respondents? Very briefly, if possible.
is it relevant to a question, quantitative information, quantitative data survey?
I think so.
I,
Or
I,
in general,
I,
in general.
yeah. Oh, but there is for that answer one that there is no particular percentage as such, because it's like, okay, you take a sample. When you take the interview people, it is likely that you are not many will act in the same pattern as one person. So then when you are summing up and you are getting that collective information, so it is unlikely to affect the overall accuracy. So there is uh, no such benchmark or rule that much of question need to be answered. So that's
Yeah. And the next question is it better to take most updated data? What about long run? Is it accurate or not?
it depends on the research objectives. If you want to do a trend analysis, then you have, if you are going to do a predict about the future, it is better you have to select some time series and in different time frames. But if you are going to make a decision right now, if you are going to make a based on, okay, you are going to design something, product design, maybe something service design based on your data, you need to rely on the most updated information. But if you are as I mentioned, that if you are going to predict certain patterns in the future, you have to consider some historic empirical information for some time as well. So it really depends on your research questions and objectives. So then both options are can be considered.
Yes. The very final question, is it
Okay.
reliable to get the data from the social media platform?
Social media platform, that is also like, okay, not depending on the purpose. If you're going to see a fact, if you're going to get facts, for an example, okay, what's about the um, population of certain area, or if you are going to, because it's not factually correct certain things in social media. But if you are going to analyze some patterns of how people behave on certain their perception matters, or how their social media analytics normally involve in analyzing the nature of post, because it's like how many people are going to do the hate speech, how many people are expressing concerns on certain things. So that that behavioral patterns that you can get from social media, but I would say it is highly unreliable to rely on get information on facts. Facts means like actual account of certain things has happened. So you cannot consider social media as a good data source for that.
Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Indika Sovis. So it's in detail. It's a very detailed presentation. So now we would like to thank you. So to deliver the thanking remarks, I would like to invite the Ms. Chandrika Mathavan, who is a financial analyst at the Department of Public Enterprises, Ministry of Finance, and she's also a member of SLEvA Academic Committee. Over to you, Ms. Chandrika.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Really, this is a valuable presentation delivered by our consultant, Mr. Indika Sovis. We really thank you very much for this. We got many valuable points from your presentation regarding research methodology. I have several questions regarding that, but unfortunately, due to the time limit, we couldn't go on further. I more welcome some upcoming webinars from you regarding this ChatGPT based researchers, how we can get the assistance from the ChatGPT for the researchers. Regarding that, I think you may do many researchers on that in these days. These days, that is the very trending research method, trending aid in the research, so that we would like to get more knowledge on that. So I think you would do that in the future webinars. And I would like to thank Mr. Sabeen Sharic also for your valuable coordination for this event. So thank you everyone, every participant for this event. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Chandrika. So as we conclude today's insightful session of data collection and ethics, so I, as a moderator, want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed speaker, Mr. Indika Sovis, for sharing his expertise and valuable perspective on this data collection and data ethics in data collections. Right, it was a very wonderful session. It brought a lot of the main challenges that we face in the data collections and the considerations on ethical aspects. Thank you very much. And in addition, a special thanks goes to Sri Lanka Evaluation Association for organizing this webinar, presided by Mr. Jinendra Kotalawala and his team, and to all our participants for their active engagement and thought-provoking questions. So actually, this discussion has highlighted the importance of ethical, reliable, and
Dr. Sabeen.
Indira, I think Dr. Sabeen is experienced in connection.
Yeah, you can we can
Yes.
conclude,
Since
right?
he has like almost conclude the session. So as the last point, we expect to see all of you in next webinar as well. Thank you very much, and good
Thank
night.
you, everyone, and thank you for having me.
Have a good evening.
Okay,
Have a good night.
thank you. Okay, bye, Salama.
Thank you very much.